In this section, we want to look at linear functions. First, we want to look at what are the elements to a linear function and how are they graphed. So some of the elements that we'll look at to create a linear function, the first thing we want to look at is going to be the slope. So the slope you can think about as a couple different things. You can think of it, and you may have heard of it, as known as the rise over run. The change in your y values divided by the change in your x values, maybe the rate of change, or maybe you've just simply seen it in a formula. Typically, when you're solving, you might see that formula m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, right? So here we've got all the different ways that hopefully we've heard about a slope before. One thing to remember about a slope is that it is a constant rate of change. So that number is not going to change. So no matter which points that you pick on the line, it should always simplify down to the same exact fraction or ratio. Okay, so to find the slope, if we're looking at a graph, you can simply count. When I count from one point to the next, I always want to read the graph from left to right, just like you read a book. So I can count from my left point to my right point. I'm going to count how do the y value change, and then I'm going to count the x's. How do the x values change? And then I'll set it up as a fraction and reduce if I need to. Okay. Now, as I'm doing this, if I always read the graph from the left point to the right point, if I go up in the y values, it would be positive, and if I go down in the y values, then it would be negative. Okay, so let's look at the first example doing just that, just trying to count the slope. So I can pick any 2 points, and I'll do 2 of them so you can see. So let's say I pick this very first point here at -3, -3. And then I'm going to pick this very next point to the right, which is -1, 1. So I'm going to look at the rise. So I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4 units up. So I'd be a positive 4 units up. Then I'm going to go 1, 2 units to the right. So my rise was a positive 4. My run was a 2. And I can reduce that to have a slope of 2. Okay, again, we said it doesn't matter which points that I pick. So let's say that I had picked 2 different points. So let's say I picked this point here in the middle and then this very next point. So I'm going to go up this time 2 units, so up 2, and to the right 1. So my slope, you're thinking, oh, well, that's different. Not really, because if it's positive 2 over 1, that still reduces to a slope of 2. So it doesn't matter which points that you pick, I'll be able to find the slope. Okay. Now, I could also do that from an equation using those 2 points. So if I didn't want to graph it, if I didn't want to use the graph, I could have picked those points. So remember the first point that we used was -3, -3. And then the next point that we had was -1, 1. So let's see if we were using that in a formula. So if my point, -3, -3, and my other point was -1, 1. So let's see if we can use the formula. So I'm going to label my points. My first point that I was using is going to be x1, y1. And my second point that I'm using is going to be it's going to be x2, y2. All right, so I'm going to use my formula now. My formula says that I'm going to take y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Okay, so now that I've got it set up, I'm going to do the math on this. So remember, 2 negatives are going to make a positive there. So I take 3 plus 1, I get 4. 3 minus 1 is going to be 2. So in the end, I see the slope is again 2. So it doesn't matter if I'm using points actually on the graph or if I'm using the numbers of the points and using my formula. Okay. So the next element that we want to look at is the y-intercept. So the y-intercept is the point, the value where the line crosses the y-axis. Okay, so on this, I'm just going to identify where does it actually cross. So looking at this first graph again, I can see I've got my y-axis going down here in the very center, going down vertically. I'm going to find where the line crosses that y-axis, and it's going to cross at 3. So that means my b is going to be 3. So my y-intercept is going to be 0, 3. Okay. So again, I can look and find where I'm going to cross the y-axis. From my points, I can also find where I'm going to cross it by just looking at the value there. Okay. Now, on this next example, I want us to do both. We're going to find not only the slope, but we're going to find our y-intercept. So my slope, let's start it off. I've got a point here, a point here. I'm going to this time move down 1, 2, 3. Down, so I'm going to make it negative. Right, 1, 2. So my slope would be the change in the y's, so a negative 3, divided by the change in the x's, 2. There's nothing to reduce there, so there is my slope. Okay, remembering I'm reading that graph from left to right. Then I'm going to identify my y-intercept. So I'm going to find where I cross the y-axis. Again, we're there at 3, so it should be 0, 3 for that y-intercept. All right, now let's look at this next one. Same idea. We're going to find our slope. Our slope is going to be, I'm going to use this first point here at negative 4, 1. This time I'm going to use my formula, negative 4, 1. My next point is at 0, 4. So I'm going to use my formula. Let's go over here to the side. So I'm going to say if my first point is my x1, y1, my next point is my x2, y2. So I'm going to say 4 minus 1 over 0 minus negative 4. I'm going to make that a plus in the denominator, so I'm going to get 3 over 4 to be my slope. I can also just count it, so I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3 over 1, 2, 3, 4. So I can see that slope would again be the 3 over 4. All right, so I'm going to see where does it cross the y-axis. It's going to cross there right at 4. So my b is going to be 4. So I would have 0, 4 as my y-intercept. So let's do our last one. You can do it whichever way that you want. So if you want to pause the video and try it. Hopefully you were able to find that my slope is equal to negative 5 over 2. And the y-intercept would be at 5, so I'd have 0, 5. So whichever way you solved it, hopefully that is what you were getting.